Chapter 1. Introduction. A quiet evening in ancient Egypt. In the reign of a pharaoh whose name the wind has mostly worn away. In a small house of mud brick on the western shore of the Nile, across from Thebes, a woman named Merit is doing something that will outlast every monument she can see from her doorway. She's lighting a lamp. It is a shallow dish of fired clay, no larger than her palm, filled with oil and floated with a twist of linen. And when the wick catches, the whole low room turns the color of honey. Outside, the sun is going down over the desert hills where the dead are buried and the living are coming home. But here's the part that still puzzles people who study these quiet houses 3,000 years later. When Merit and her family lie down to sleep tonight, they will not rest their heads on anything soft. No down pillow, no folded wool, nothing a modern hand would call comfort. They will rest the back of the neck on a curved block of wood, raised on a little pillar, carved sometimes with the face of a god. And the strange thing is this: they could have chosen otherwise. These were people who knew luxury, who scented their oils and pleated their linen and painted their walls. So why would a household with the means for comfort lay its sleeping heads, night after night, on what looks to us like a carpenter's offcut? Hold that question. We will not answer it for a good while yet, because the answer turns out to be tangled up in almost everything they did after sundown. Before we settle in, if you enjoy what we do here, a like or a subscribe genuinely helps us keep making these long, slow evenings. And if you have ever lit a room with something other than electricity, an oil lamp, a hurricane lamp, a candle during a power outage that lasted far longer than anyone promised, I would especially love to hear about it down in the comments. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, settle your shoulders, and let us ease together into one ordinary evening 3,000 years ago in the house of a woman named Merit. Chapter 2. Sunset on the Nile, coming home to a Theban household. Merit is perhaps 32 years old, though she would not count it that way, because in her world, a person measures age by the floods of the river rather than by birthdays. And she has seen the great water rise and fall some 30 times. She's not wealthy. She's not poor either. Her husband is a draftsman, one of the men who lays out the painted scenes inside the tombs being cut into the hills, and that places the family somewhere in the broad, comfortable middle. The kind of household that owns more than one room, eats meat on festival days, and worries about exactly the same small things every family worries about as the light goes. The light at this hour is the thing she notices first, every single day, the way you might notice a familiar song. It comes in low and gold across the rooftops and turns the mud brick walls the color of baked bread. Egyptians built almost everything out of the river itself, mud from the banks, mixed with straw and chopped reed, pressed into molds and dried hard in the sun. It is cheap, it is everywhere, and it does one thing magnificently. It holds the cool of the night long into the morning, and the warmth of the day long into the evening. If you grew up in a house with thick walls and no air conditioning, and a good many of you did, you already understand the genius of this without anyone explaining it to you. You knew which room stayed coolest at noon. You knew to open the windows at the right hour of the evening and not a minute before. The Egyptians knew it too, and they had been knowing it for 2,000 years before Merit was born, which is its own quiet thought. She was already ancient to herself, the inheritor of a way of living so old that no one questioned it any more than we question the wheel. The windows tell you the same story. They are small, and they are set high up near the ceiling rather than at eye level, which is a strange choice until you have spent one afternoon under an Egyptian sun and understood instantly that the goal was never the view. The goal was to keep the brutal light out and let the rising heat escape. High windows pull the hot air up and away. The small openings keep the glare from turning the room into an oven. So the house breathes. As the evening cools, the warm air of the day floats up and out through those high slots, and the cool river air slides in low through the door, and the whole building exhales. And that exhale, that first cool breath of the evening, moving through the rooms, is the signal the whole household has been waiting for. The day's work is done. Out in the fields, the laborers have laid down their tools. In the village workshops, the chisels and brushes have gone quiet. And here's the small revelation that I think gets lost when we picture ancient Egypt only through its enormous stone faces and its golden kings. Most Egyptians, most nights, were doing exactly what you are doing right now. They were trying to wind down. They were tired. They wanted the dark to be gentle. This is the thing worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes everything that follows. We tend to imagine the ancient world as relentlessly hard, and in many ways it was. But hardship and tenderness are not opposites. The same hands that hauled stone and ground grain also reached, at the end of the day, for a cool cloth, a scented oil, a familiar word spoken into the dark, to keep the night safe. The Egyptians built an entire sophisticated art around the simple human business of letting go of the day, and we have only really started, in our own century, to take that business seriously again. Merritt's husband comes home now. His name is Kay, and he smells of stone dust and the faint, earthy tang of the pigments he grinds: ochre for red and yellow, carbon for black, a costly blue made from heated sand and copper that he is not allowed to waste a grain of. He has spent the day in a tomb, on his back or his knees in the lamplight, laying out figures that are meant to last forever. It is good work, steady work, the kind a man can be proud of. It is also the kind of work that leaves you, by sundown, with an aching neck and grit in every crease of your skin. Merritt hands him water without a word. They have done this 10,000 times. I want to stay with Kay's neck for a moment, because it matters more than it sounds. A man who spends his days craning to paint a ceiling is a man who thinks, genuinely, about how he will rest his head at night. Keep that in the back of your mind. We posed a question at the very start about why these people slept on hard, curved supports instead of soft pillows. And I promise you the answer is coming. But it will make far more sense once you have followed this family all the way down into the dark. For now, simply notice that the headrest waiting on the sleeping platform is not, to Kay, an instrument of discomfort. To him, it might be the most comfortable object in the house. Hold the thought. The evening meal is already taking shape. In Egypt, the heaviest eating of the day happened now, after the heat had broken, and the centerpiece, the thing that was always there, was bread. Egyptians ate so much bread that workers were sometimes paid in it. Loaves were a unit of wages, a kind of edible coin. Merritt's bread is made from emmer, an old hearty wheat, with a nutty, slightly chewy character, ground by hand on a stone quern until her shoulders complain. The grinding is endless work. Archaeologists who study the skeletons of Egyptian women find the wear of it written right into their bones, in the knees, the back, the toes pressed against the floor. There is a small, grim joke buried in the archaeology, and I will share it gently because it is the kind of thing this audience appreciates. The bread was so gritty, full of stone dust from the grinding and wind-blown sand from the desert, that it wore the Egyptians' teeth down to the gums. We have the skulls. By middle age, many of them had ground their own molars flat, eating the very bread that kept them alive. Those of you who remember dentistry before the modern era, before fluoride, before anything resembling comfort in a dentist's chair, will not need me to belabor what a lifetime of that did to a person. Bread gave life. Bread, slowly, also took the teeth. The Egyptians simply lived with it, the way every generation learns to live with the small cruelties of its own daily comforts. Around the bread gathered everything else: onions and garlic, which Egyptians loved with a devotion that borders on the spiritual, lentils and chickpeas and broad beans, cooked slow into something thick and filling, sycamore figs and dates, sweet enough to feel like a small celebration at the end of a plain meal, and honey, when the household could afford it, kept in a sealed jar and spooned out the way you might once have rationed sugar carefully, knowingly, as a thing too good to waste. For most families, meat was rare, a festival pleasure rather than a nightly habit. The river gave fish. The marshes gave ducks to those with the time and patience to catch them. But the everyday table was a green and golden table, built from grain and pulse and fruit. And then there was beer. We should pause on this, because it is one of those facts that genuinely surprises people. Egyptian beer was not a vice and not a luxury. It was food, and it was water you could trust, thick, soupy, low in alcohol, brewed from the same emmer that made the bread. It was drunk by everyone, all day, including children. It was nutritious. It was safer than the river. It was, in a sense, breakfast and lunch and dinner's reliable companion. By the evening meal, a cup of mild beer was less a drink to get merry on, and more the ancient equivalent of a warm, filling glass of something at the end of a long shift. Nothing about it would have felt remarkable to merit. It was simply what was in the jar. Chapter 3, The Evening Meal, Bread, Beer, and the Family Hour. They eat sitting low on mats, on small stools, around a table that rises barely above the knee. There's no notion here of a dining room, no long table with assigned places, none of the formal architecture of the modern meal. The family simply gathers in the pool of lamplight where the food is, and the room arranges itself around that warmth. With Merritt and Kay tonight are their 2 children and Kay's mother, an old woman named Ty whose hands have long since stopped grinding grain and whose job now is mostly to sit, to remember, and to tell the children which spirits to be wary of in the dark. Every household had one. You probably knew one yourself. This is the social hour, and it would have felt instantly familiar to anyone who grew up before the television colonized the evening. The talk is small and circular and comforting. Who said what at the well? Whose roof needs mending? Whether the flood will come high or low this year? Which neighbor is feuding with which other neighbor and over what? The children half listen and half fade. Ty tells a story she has told 100 times, and the children correct her on the details, and she ignores them, which is exactly how it is supposed to go. The lamp burns its slow, honey-colored burn. Outside, the village is doing the same thing in 100 other houses, all of them quieting at once, like a field of birds settling for the night. The lamps themselves deserve a slow look, because light, before electricity, was never something you took for granted. It was something you made, tended, and rationed. Merit's lamps are simple. Shallow open dishes of clay, filled with oil pressed from castor seed, or sometimes the finer oil of the moringa tree, with a wick twisted from old linen rag, laid in the pool so that one end drinks the oil and the other end burns. The light they give is soft, golden, and frankly not very bright. By our standards, a single lamp lights a small room the way a dying campfire does. Well enough to see faces, not well enough to read fine work. There is a reason candlelit dinners still feel romantic to us, and it is not nostalgia for an age we never lived in. It is that this kind of light does something specific to a room and to the people in it. It softens every edge. It hides the dust and the cracks and the wear. It pulls everyone physically closer, because the circle of useful light is small, so the family draws in toward it without ever deciding to. And it sets a hard, honest limit on the day. When the oil runs low and the wick gutters, the evening is simply over, in a way that a wall switch never quite allows. The light decided for them. There was a mercy in that. When the meal winds down, the household begins its slow turn from the social to the private, and here is where the evening starts to become something more deliberate than just the end of a workday. The dishes are cleared, which in practice means the scraps go to the animals and the clay bowls are wiped, because nothing is wasted in a house like this. Water is brought, and it is not ordinary water. It has been mixed with natron, a natural mineral salt the Egyptians gathered from dry lake beds, the same substance, remarkably, that they used to dry out and preserve the dead. In the home, in small amounts, it was something gentler, a cleanser, a mild soap, a way to wash the day's dust and sweat from hands and feet before sleep. The washing of the hands and feet at the end of the day was not a fussy thing, but it was a real thing, done with intention. In a world of dust, and Egypt is, above almost all else, a world of dust. Fine, pale grit that gets into everything and everyone, the act of rinsing the feet before lying down, was the act of leaving the outside world outside. It is the same instinct that makes a person, even now, want to wash their face before bed, even when they are too tired to bother. The body knows the difference between a day self and a night self, and water is how you cross between them. And scent enters here too, because the Egyptians did not separate cleanliness from pleasure the way a colder, more puritanical age later would. Into the wash water, or onto the skin afterward, when oils touched with fragrance lily, the prized blue lotus, myrrh for those who could afford it. We will come to the blue lotus properly later tonight, because it is bound up with one of the most intriguing questions about how these people actually fell asleep, and it deserves more than a passing mention. For now, simply breathe in the idea of it. A tired family, washed and lightly scented, sitting in the last of the lamplight, the day rinsed off them, the night not yet begun. It is worth saying plainly, before we go further into the bedroom and its small rituals, that we know all of this in pieces rather than as a whole. No ancient Egyptian sat down to write us a guide titled How We Spent Our Evenings. What we have instead is scattered and patient evidence, the lamps and basins and headrests dug from the floors of houses, the tomb paintings that show food and family and washing, the worn bones that tell us what the work cost, the medical and magical papyri that record the spells and remedies, and the houses themselves, especially at one extraordinary village we will visit before the night is through, where the workers who built the royal tombs left their own ordinary lives pressed into the dirt. From all of that, carefully, we reconstruct an evening. It is a reconstruction, not a recording, but it is an honest one. So far, we have watched the household come in from the day, share its bread and beer, tend its small lights, and begin the careful washing that marks the turn toward night. But the truly distinctive part, the part that makes an Egyptian evening unlike a Roman one or a medieval one, the part with the scented ointments and the protective amulets and the wooden headrests carved with the grinning face of a household god, all of that is still ahead of us. Before the family lies down, there is a whole sequence of preparation. The body to be readied, the spirits to be addressed, the night to be made safe. And it is in that sequence that our opening question finally begins to find its answer. Merit rises, lifts the lamp, and carries the small flame toward the back of the house where the family sleeps. The children are already drooping. Tai is murmuring the first of the night's protective words, almost without thinking, the way an old hand says grace. The room behind Merit goes dark as she leaves it. The room ahead of her wakes into gold as she enters. And on the low raised platform where the family will lie, in the soft moving light, the curved wooden headrest is waiting, patient, peculiar, and, as we are about to discover, far more than a simple block of wood. Chapter 4. Undressing the day. Linen, jewelry, and the body at night. Merit sets the lamp into a small niche cut into the wall, where it sits the way a nightlight sits on a hallway shelf, and the room arranges itself around that single point of gold. This is the most private room in the house, and the smallest. It does not need to be large. A sleeping room in Egypt held the people, the mats, the headrests, and almost nothing else, because the day was lived elsewhere, on the roof, in the courtyard, in the main room, and the bedroom, was reserved for the one activity it was built for. She begins, as she does every night, by taking off the day. The jewelry comes off first. By day, an Egyptian woman of Merit's standing wore more of it than we might expect, not gold, which was for the rich and the dead, but faience, that wonderful glazed paste the Egyptians fired into beads, the color of the sky and the river. A broad collar of many strands, bracelets, perhaps anklets, earrings if her ears were pierced, which by this period many were. It was decoration, yes, but it was never only decoration. Egyptian jewelry was armor of a kind, every bead and amulet chosen partly for what it warded off. Color had power. Blue-green was the color of growth and renewal. A collar of it was a small daily prayer worn around the throat. She lays it all into a small wooden box, the way you might empty your pockets onto a dresser at the end of a long day, that small, almost unconscious ritual of setting down the things you carried. There is a tenderness in these objects that survives them. Archaeologists have opened these little boxes 3,000 years later and found the beads still coiled exactly as someone left them on an ordinary night, expecting to lift them again in the morning. Some mornings never came, and the box waited anyway. It is the kind of detail that stops you, if you let it. A woman put her necklace away one evening, as she always did, and the gesture outlasted her by 30 centuries. Then the linen. Egyptians lived in linen the way we live in cotton. It was the fabric of the whole civilization, spun from flax grown in the black soil of the floodplain, woven by women on horizontal looms in a process so labor-intensive that fine linen was genuinely a measure of wealth. The very finest, the so-called royal linen, was woven so sheer it was nearly transparent, light as breath, and it took an expert hand's months to produce a single garment of it. Merit's everyday dress is plainer than that, but it is still linen, and at night she changes out of the dress she wore through the dusty day into something lighter and looser, a simple length of cloth meant only for sleep. It is worth pausing on the sheer human labor stitched into every thread of that cloth, because it tells you something about how these people valued the things they slept in. Anyone here who ever spun, sewed, or mended out of necessity, who darned socks through a war, who turned a collar to get another year out of a shirt, who made to do, will understand instinctively what linen meant in a world with no machines. Cloth was not bought casually. It was made, slowly, by someone you knew, often by your own hands. To sleep wrapped in clean linen was a real comfort and a real expense, and Merit knows the difference between the two. Now comes the part that I think would most surprise a visitor from our own century, the ointments. Egyptians oiled their skin nightly, and they did it for reasons that were equal parts practical and sacred, with no clear line between the two. Consider the climate they lived in. The Egyptian sun does not forgive. It cracks the lips, splits the heels, dries the skin to parchment, and ages a face fast. Against all of that, oil was medicine. A nightly working of fat and fragrance into the skin kept it supple, sealed in moisture, soothed the day's burns, and held off the relentless erosion of sun and sand. It was, in the most literal sense, the original skincare routine, and the Egyptians had perfected it, while most of the world was still rubbing on animal grease and hoping. The oils were scented, and the scents mattered. Lily was a favorite cool, green, faintly sweet, and so were moringa and balanos oils as the base, sometimes touched with myrrh or cinnamon-like resins for those who could reach them through trade. The blue lotus, which I keep promising you and will not keep you waiting on much longer, perfumed the finest of these. The fragrance was not vanity. In Egyptian thinking, a pleasant scent was a sign of divine presence. The gods themselves were said to smell of incense and flowers, and to make your own skin sweet was to align yourself, even briefly, with the order of the heavens. A scented body was a body at peace with the world. And then there's the kohl, the dark line around the eyes that has become, more than almost anything else, the visual shorthand for ancient Egypt itself. We tend to think of it as makeup, and it was, but to leave it there is to miss most of the story. Kohl was a ground paste of minerals, often galena, a lead-based ore, mixed into a fine dark powder and applied around the eye with a small stick. It made the eyes striking, certainly, but it also reduced the glare of the sun off the pale sand, the way a modern athlete smears black grease under the eyes. And it was believed to protect against eye disease, which in a hot, dusty, fly-ridden land was no small thing. Form, function, and faith, all in a single line of black. At night, though, the day's kohl came off, wiped away with a little oil and a soft cloth, and a fresh, lighter application might be smoothed on before sleep. Some of it carried medicinal additives meant to soothe and protect the eyes through the night. Egyptian medical papyri are full of eye remedies, because eye trouble was everywhere in that landscape, and the line between cosmetic and cure ran right through the kohl pot. A woman wiping the dark from her lashes at the end of the day was doing something her great-great-grandmother had done, with very nearly the same ingredients, in very nearly the same way. There's a long, unbroken chain of hands reaching for that small, dark pot across thousands of years. The children get the same treatment, in smaller measure. Kay works a little oil into the cracked skin of his daughter's arms while she fights and loses the long, slow battle against sleep. A child's skin in that climate suffered as much as an adult's, and a parent who could spare the oil spared it. There is nothing in the historical record that says Egyptian fathers tended their children at bedtime. Not in those words, but there is a great deal in the record about the oils, the lamps, the family rooms, the obvious and well-documented Egyptian devotion to children, and from that we can reconstruct, with reasonable confidence, the shape of an ordinary tenderness. We cannot prove this particular moment. We can only say it is the kind of moment that surely happened 100 million times and left no trace but the worn rim of an oil jar. Old Ty has her own slower version of all this. Her hands no longer move quickly, but they move surely, drawing a simple wooden comb through what is left of her hair, working a thinner oil into skin gone soft and papery with age. She's done this every night for 60-odd years, through floods good and bad, through the reigns of kings whose names she half remembers, through the births and deaths of more people than she can now hold in her head at once. The routine does not change because the routine is the point. It is the thread that runs through a whole life. The one reliable thing in a world that gives few guarantees. If you have ever watched an elderly parent or grandparent move through a bedtime ritual with that same unhurried certainty, folding the same blanket, winding the same clock, saying the same small words, then you have seen what I am describing, and you know it has nothing to do with ancient Egypt and everything to do with being a person. Chapter 5. Skincare as sacred practice, oil, scent, and the spiritual body. I called the oiling a skincare routine a moment ago, and that is true, but I want to push on the word, because to the Egyptians, the care of the body was not a separate thing from the care of the soul. We tend to draw a firm line between the practical and the spiritual, between rubbing on lotion because your skin is dry and saying a prayer because you are afraid of the dark. The Egyptians drew no such line. To them, the body was the vessel the spirit lived in this life and, they hoped, in the next. And to keep it clean, whole, scented, and protected was a duty owed to the gods and to oneself at once. This is why a humble jar of ointment in a workman's house was treated with a care that can look, to us, almost excessive. The oils were stored in fine vessels, alabaster when possible, that beautiful translucent stone that glows when a lamp is held behind it, and they were used with measured deliberation, not slathered on. To anoint the body was a small sacred act, the same verb the Egyptians used for the anointing of statues of the gods and the bodies of the dead. The living, the divine, and the deceased were all cared for with oil. When Merit smooths lily-scented ointment into her skin before sleep, she is performing, in miniature, and probably without thinking about it, the same gesture the priests perform over the great gods in the temples across the river. The scale is different. The meaning rhymes. There's a marvelous detail from Egyptian banquets that tells you how seriously they took scent, and it is worth a moment because it is the kind of thing you do not forget. At feasts, the guests are often shown in the tomb paintings wearing cones on their heads, pale, rounded cones perched atop their wigs. For a long time, scholars argued about what these were, and the leading idea was that they were cones of scented fat, or wax, designed to slowly melt over the course of the evening, releasing perfume and oil down over the hair and shoulders. Imagine, if you will, a party where the host has arranged for everyone to be gently, continuously perfumed by their own melting hats. Whether the cones were literally worn or were a painter's symbol for "this person smells wonderful," the underlying truth holds. These were people who built fragrance into the very architecture of pleasure. Merit's household is far humbler than a banquet hall, but the same instinct runs through it at a smaller, quieter scale. Now those of you who keep your own small evening rituals, the cup of tea at a fixed hour, the particular order in which you lock the doors, the lotion or the liniment worked into tired hands before bed, I would genuinely love to know what they are, and whether you ever stop to think how old that human habit really is. Drop them in the comments if you are inclined. There's something quietly moving about realizing your nightly routine has a 3,000-year-old cousin. But back to the family, because the body is nearly ready now, and the next stage of the evening is the one that mattered to the Egyptians most of all, making the night itself safe to enter. Kay sets the headrests in place. There it is again, our peculiar friend, the curved block of wood on its little column, waiting at the top of each sleeping platform. By now you have seen it half a dozen times in the corner of the scene, and I have asked you twice to hold your question about it, and I am asking you to hold it just a little longer, because we are now close. The headrest is not only furniture. It sits at the exact meeting point of three things this family cares about deeply: physical comfort in a hot climate, protection against the dangers of the night, and a set of beliefs about what happens to a sleeping person and where exactly their spirit goes. To understand the headrest, you have to understand all three. In the next part of the evening, the amulets, the spells, the careful guarding of the dark is where those threads finally start to braid together. So the day has been undressed. The jewelry is in its box. The dusty dress is set aside. The skin is oiled and scented. The eyes are clean. The children are oiled and drooping. The old woman has combed her hair, and the linen is laid out cool and pale across the platforms. The body is ready. What remains is the harder, older work, the work of persuading the dark to be kind. Because for all their sophistication, for all their medicine and engineering and art, the Egyptians went to sleep each night genuinely afraid of what the night might bring. The spirits, the demons, the scorpion in the corner, the bad dream that was not just a dream, but a message or an attack. And they had built, over thousands of years, an entire technology of protection to meet that fear. That technology is where we are headed next. Chapter 6, Guardians of the Dark. Bess, Amulets, and Protective Magic. Meet Bess. If you have spent any time at all looking at Egyptian household objects, you already know his face. Even if you never knew his name, a squat, broad, bandy-legged dwarf god with a wide, flat face, a beard, a lion's mane, often his tongue stuck out and his expression caught somewhere between a grin and a snarl. He is, frankly, a little ridiculous looking, and that was entirely the point. Bess was the protector of the household, of women in childbirth, of children, and above all, of people while they slept. His job was to stand at the threshold of the vulnerable hours and frighten away whatever might come for the family in the dark. And he did it not with dignity, but with noise, ugliness, and a face fierce enough to scare off a demon. And here the headrest and the god come together, because Egyptian headrests were very often carved with Bess or with protective symbols, right there at the base where the sleeper's head would rest above them through the night. This was not decoration for decoration's sake. A person lying with their head cradled on a Bess-carved headrest was placing themselves, quite literally, under the guard of the god through the hours when they could not guard themselves. The most defenseless moment in any human life is the moment of deep sleep, and the Egyptians felt that vulnerability keenly. They did not have a nightlight or a locked deadbolt or a security system. They had Bess, and they had the spoken word, and they had the careful arrangement of small sacred objects around the sleeping body. It was, in its own logic, a complete security system. It simply ran on faith rather than electricity. The amulets came out now and took their places. An Egyptian home was, by our standards, absolutely thick with these small protective objects worn on the body, hung on cords, tucked into beds, set in niches, pressed into the hands of the sick and the sleeping. There was the wedjat, the protective eye which you would know if you saw it, the stylized falcon's eye that watched over wholeness and healing. There were scarabs, the dung beetle form that the Egyptians, in one of their more poetic leaps, made into a symbol of rebirth and the rising sun. There were figures of the gods, knots, hands, hearts. Each one did a specific job. Each one was a small, portable piece of order set against a large and disorderly night. It is the children who got the most protection, and that too will feel familiar to anyone who has ever stood in a dark doorway, listening to make sure a small chest was still rising and falling. Child mortality in ancient Egypt was brutally high by some estimates. A third or more of children did not reach the age of 5, and every parent knew it in their bones. So the children slept ringed with amulets, with Bess watching from the headrest, with whispered words laid over them like a second blanket. We can read this from our comfortable distance as superstition, but strip away the specific beliefs, and what you find underneath is something timeless and aching. A parent doing everything within their power, including things beyond their power, to keep a child safe through the night. The tools change. The fear does not. We know a startling amount about these protective practices because the Egyptians wrote them down, surviving papyri, medical, magical, and the great blurry territory in between, where the two were never really separate. Preserve spells against nightmares, against demons, against the bites of scorpions and snakes, against the spirits of the angry dead who might trouble the living. There are spells specifically for the protection of a sleeping child, to be recited by the mother over the bed. There are spells for the headache, the fever, the bad dream. The line between what we would call medicine and what we would call prayer simply did not exist for them. A remedy was a recipe plus a spell, and to leave out the spell was to leave the cure half-made. So Tai murmurs. Old women across Egypt murmured at this hour, and old women, I suspect, have murmured protectively over sleeping families in every culture that has ever existed. The words she says are not improvised. They are inherited, worn smooth by generations of repetition, formulas calling on the protective gods to drive back whatever walks in the dark. To a passing stranger, it might sound like mumbling. To the family, it is a wall going up around the house, brick by spoken brick. The children, half asleep, do not hear the words so much as the rhythm of them. The low, steady cadence that means the same thing every child's body has ever understood it to mean. Someone is awake. Someone is watching. It is safe to let go now. And the fears were not all imaginary. Some of them had 8 legs. The scorpion was a genuine, constant, well-founded danger in an Egyptian home they came in from the heat. They hid in the dark corners and under things, and a sting could kill a child and badly sicken an adult. The Egyptians had a goddess, Serke, specifically associated with scorpion stings and their cure. and there were practitioners who specialized in exactly this. The magician doctors who could recite the right spells and apply the right remedies for venom. When Ty's words ask protection against the creatures that creep, she is not being metaphorical. She means the actual scorpion that might actually be, at this very moment, somewhere in the actual room. The supernatural and the entirely practical shared the same dark floor. Chapter 7. The mystery of the wooden headrest, finally explained. Remember, at the very beginning of tonight, the question I asked you to hold? Why would a family that knew comfort, that scented its oils and pleated its linen and painted its walls, lay its sleeping heads, night after night, on a hard, curved block of wood instead of a soft pillow? We have circled it all evening, and now, with the family settling down and the headrests finally in use, here is the answer. And it is not one answer. It is 3 braided together, and the braid is the whole point. Start with the first strand, the simplest one, and it is sitting right against Kay's neck this very moment. The heat. In a climate like Egypt's, the worst thing a sleeper can do is press a hot, sweating head and neck flat against a hot surface, smothered in a mass of soft padding. The headrest does the opposite. It lifts the head clear of the bedding entirely, leaving a cushion of open air to circulate around the neck and skull through the night. It keeps the head cool. Anyone who has ever flipped their pillow to the cool side at 3 a.m, hunting that one patch of relief, understands the problem the headrest solves. The Egyptians simply solved it with carpentry instead of cotton. Lift the head into the moving air, and the long hot night becomes survivable. That is the practical strand, and it alone would almost justify the design. The second strand is the one we just walked through protection. The headrest was not merely a thing you slept on. It was a thing that guarded the most precious and vulnerable part of you, the head, through the most dangerous hours. That is why so many were carved with bess, with protective symbols, with the imagery of warding and watching. The sleeper lay with the guardian directly beneath the skull, holding the head up out of harm's way, both physically and spiritually. A soft pillow protects nothing. A carved headrest in the Egyptian mind stood watch. It raised the head not only into the cool air, but into safety. And so the same object answered 2 needs at once, the bodily and the spiritual, which is exactly the kind of efficient, layered thinking this whole civilization excelled at. And the third strand is the most beautiful, and the one that turns the whole humble object into something close to poetry. Look at the shape of the headrest. That curve cradling the head, rising on its column, it is the same shape the Egyptians drew for the horizon, the place where the sun rises. Their word and symbol for the horizon, the akit, was a sun cradled between 2 hills, and the headrest echoes it almost exactly. The head, round as the sun, cradled in the curve, lifted up to where the light returns. To the Egyptians, sleep was a small death, a nightly journey through darkness from which one hoped to be reborn with the morning, exactly as the sun god travels through the underworld each night and rises again at dawn. To lay your head in the headrest was to align your sleeping head with the rising sun, to lie down each night in the position of resurrection, in quiet confidence that you, like the sun, would rise. So there is your answer, and notice that it is sitting right here in the room with us, not floating somewhere in the abstract. It is under Kay's neck this very minute, the cool air moving where a pillow would have smothered, the grinning little guardian carved at the base, holding the night at bay. The gentle curve placing his sleeping head in the same shape as the dawn he trusts will come. The headrest was never a failure of comfort or a poverty of imagination. It was comfort, protection, and faith, carved into a single piece of wood that a craftsman like Kay would have understood in his hands without ever needing to say any of it aloud. To us, it looks like a hard block. To him, it is the most carefully designed object in the house, the thing that gets him cool through the night, safe through the dark, and ready, head facing the horizon, for the sun to find him again in the morning. Now, before we drift onward, and we are past the midpoint of our evening now, so the worst of the explaining is behind us, and the rest is mostly settling deeper into the quiet. I will say honestly that not every Egyptian found the headrest comfortable, and we have small hints that they knew it too. Some headrests were padded with a little folded linen for those who wanted it. Some people surely cheated, the way you might, and bunched a cloth under their cheek when no one was looking. We are reconstructing a general practice, not a law that every head obeyed, but the headrest was the norm, the expected and honored thing, found in homes rich and poor, and laid in tombs beside the dead, so they would have it on the far side too. Whatever its discomforts, the Egyptians chose it, across thousands of years, with their eyes open. That is worth respecting. The lamp is low now. In a little while, Merit will pinch it out, or let it die on its own as the oil gives up, and the house will fall fully dark. But we are not quite there yet, because there is more to an Egyptian night than amulets and headrests. And I have been promising you the blue lotus for the better part of an hour. There is a real and genuinely fascinating question buried in that flower, about whether the Egyptians possessed, in their scented oils and their evening rituals, something more than fragrance. Whether they had stumbled onto actual botanical aids to rest and calm the distant ancestors of the sleep remedies that fill our own shelves today. That is where we are going next, into the question of how the Egyptians did not just prepare for sleep, but may have actively, chemically, coaxed it. And it starts, as so much in Egypt does, with a flower opening on the water. Chapter 8. The Blue Lotus, Egypt's Botanical, Secret to Calm. There is a flower that appears everywhere in Egyptian art, so often that we almost stop seeing it, held to the nose at banquets, carved into columns, painted at the edge of every pool, offered to the gods, tucked into the hands of the dead. It is the blue lotus, which is not really a lotus at all, but a water lily, Nymphea cerulea, and the Egyptians were, by every measure we can find, completely devoted to it. To understand why takes us into one of the more intriguing corners of their evening world, and into a question that modern science is still, gently, poking at. The first thing the Egyptians loved about the blue lotus was its behavior, which seemed almost designed to teach a lesson about death and rebirth. Each morning the flower rises to the surface of the water and opens to the sun. Each evening it closes and sinks back beneath the surface, only to rise and open again with the next dawn. To a people who built their entire understanding of the cosmos around the daily death and resurrection of the sun, this was not a coincidence. It was a confirmation, written into a flower. The blue lotus was the sun in botanical form, vanishing into the dark water each night and returning each morning. They saw their own hoped-for journey through death mirrored in a lily, and they could not get enough of it. But here is where it gets interesting, and where I must be careful, because this is exactly the kind of topic where confident claims race far ahead of the evidence. The blue lotus contains naturally occurring compounds, among them alkaloids such as apomorphine and nuciferine that may have mild psychoactive effects, producing, by various modern accounts, a gentle calm, a soft euphoria, a soothing of the nerves. In the tomb paintings, guests are forever holding the flower to their noses, and some researchers have wondered whether this was not merely appreciation of a pleasant smell, but a deliberate seeking of the flower's calming properties. There are even suggestions that the Egyptians steeped the lotus in wine, drawing the compounds out into a mild, relaxing drink. The picture that emerges, tentatively, is of a people who may have understood that this beautiful flower did something to the mind as well as to the spirit. Now let me put the brakes on, gently, because honesty about uncertainty is something this audience appreciates and deserves. The truth is that the science here is genuinely unsettled. The psychoactive effects of the blue lotus appear to be mild at best, and a good deal of what circulates about it today, particularly in the wilder corners of the modern wellness world, where it is sold as an ancient dream flower, is exaggeration built on a thin foundation of real evidence. We do not have an Egyptian text that says plainly, "We drink the lotus to calm our minds before sleep." What we have is a flower they clearly adored, a set of compounds that might do something, a body of art that shows them engaging with it intimately, and a great deal of room for careful speculation. I would rather tell you the question is open than pretend the answer is settled. Historians and chemists are, as I speak, still working on it. What is far more certain is that the Egyptians had a deep, sophisticated, hard-won knowledge of plants and their effects on the body, and they used it. The medical papyri record hundreds of plant-based remedies for pain, for sleeplessness, for fever, for the troubles of the gut and the head. They knew the calming properties of certain herbs. They used honey, which we now know to be genuinely antibacterial, on wounds. They had remedies for the restless and the sleepless that drew on willow, on poppy and some reedings, on a whole pharmacy of the floodplain. This was not random folk fumbling. It was an accumulated tradition, tested across generations, written down and passed on. They were, in the truest sense, practicing medicine, imperfect, mixed with magic, but real. The reason this matters for our evening is that it reframes the scented oils in the lotus and the careful rituals as something more than decoration or superstition. There is a real possibility held loosely, offered as a thought rather than a fact, that an Egyptian evening was, among everything else, a mild and gentle exercise in self-soothing chemistry. The scent of lily and lotus drifting through the room, a cup of mild beer or lotus-touched wine, a warm, oiled, clean body, a familiar voice murmuring familiar words. Whether or not the lotus did anything measurable to their brain chemistry, the whole arrangement was a beautifully constructed machine for producing calm. We spend fortunes today on candles and pillow sprays and sleep teas and white noise machines, chasing exactly the state these people built into the ordinary shape of their nights. And those of you with an interest in herbs and old remedies, the gardeners, the ones who still keep a jar of dried chamomile or lavender for a restless night, the ones whose mothers and grandmothers swore by some specific tea or tincture, you are part of an unbroken line that runs straight back to this room. I would be curious to hear, in the comments, what remedies were passed down in your own families, the ones that may or may not have worked, but that someone you loved believed in. There is real wisdom in some of those old remedies and real placebo in others. And the honest truth is that the line between the two has always been blurry in our kitchens as much as in an Egyptian one. But we should move on, because the family is nearly asleep now, and there is a particular place I want to take you before the night is through a real village, with real names, where we can check our gentle reconstruction against the hard dirt of the archaeological record. Chapter 9. Deir el-Medina, a real village, real names, real nights. I have been telling you about Merit and Kei and Tai as though I have watched them, and I should be honest once more. They are a careful composite, built from real evidence but invented in their particulars. So let me now take you to a place where the people were real, where we know their actual names, their actual quarrels, their actual worries about exactly the things we have been discussing all evening. It is a village called Deir el-Medina, and it is one of the most extraordinary windows into ordinary ancient life anywhere in the world. Deir el-Medina was the home of the workers who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the King's Craftsmen, exactly like the Kai I invented, draftsmen, sculptors, painters, and their families, because these were skilled, literate workers, and because the dry desert preserved what they left behind. The village has given us an almost unbelievable wealth of detail about daily life. Thousands of ostraca flakes of limestone and pottery used as scrap paper survive, covered in everything from work records to laundry lists to love poems to angry letters about unpaid debts. We know who was absent from work and why. The records note things like a man staying home because he was brewing beer or tending a sick wife, or in one famous case, because of an argument with his spouse. These are not kings. These are people caught midlife 3,000 years ago. The houses themselves confirm much of what we have pictured tonight. In the front room of many Deir el-Medina houses, archaeologists found a curious built-in structure, a raised, enclosed platform, plastered and sometimes painted, reached by a few steps. For years, its purpose was debated, and one leading interpretation is that it was a kind of bed or birthing platform associated with the protective rituals around women, childbirth, and the vulnerable hours decorated, tellingly, with images of the household gods, including our friend Bess, and figures connected to fertility and protection. Whether bed, shrine, or both, it tells us the same thing the Headrests and Amulets told us, that the Egyptians built protection directly into the architecture of their most intimate, most vulnerable spaces. The sacred and the domestic shared the same plastered walls. The layout of these houses matches our evening almost beat for beat. A front room for receiving and for the household's protective shrine. A main living room, often with a raised seating area, and a column to hold up the roof, where the family gathered and ate. Smaller back rooms, darker and cooler, for sleeping and storage, sometimes with a cellar dug into the floor to keep food and valuables. And above it all, a flat roof and often a stairway up to it, because in the worst of the heat, the roof was the coolest place in the house. And people slept up there under the stars when the rooms below held too much of the day's warmth. Every feature we have walked through tonight, the cool, dark sleeping room, the protective imagery, the gathering space, the rooftop refuge is there in the actual ground plans, drawn by the people who lived in them. That rooftop detail deserves a moment, because it is one of the loveliest and most relatable facts about Egyptian sleep. On the hottest nights, when the mud brick walls had soaked up too much sun to give any relief, the family simply carried their mats up the stairs and slept on the roof, in the open air, under the most extraordinary night sky. Most of us will never see the desert sky before electric light, thick with stars from horizon to horizon. anyone who has slept on a porch in a heat wave, or dragged a mattress to the coolest corner of the house, or bedded down outside on a sweltering summer night because indoors was simply unbearable, has done exactly what these people did. The technology of the air conditioner is barely a century old. For all the rest of human history, the answer to a hot night was to go find the moving air, and the Egyptians found it on their roofs. What moves me most about Deir el-Medina is how human the records are. We have a man's note complaining about a noisy neighbor. We have records of who borrowed what from whom. We have a workman named Paneb, who seems, from the surviving complaints against him, to have been a genuine menace accused of theft, of debauchery, of stealing stones from a royal tomb to build his own. We have love poems of real tenderness and longing. We have a woman's name on a list, and a child's, and the small notation of a death. These were people with grudges and debts and aching backs, and difficult relatives and beloved children, who lit their lamps each evening and oiled their skin and laid their heads on the curved wood and worried, as we do, about getting up in time for work. The distance of 3,000 years collapses to nothing when you read a man's excuse note for missing a day's labor. So when I ask you to picture Merritt's household settling into sleep, know that I am not inventing out of thin air. I am drawing the lines between thousands of real dots. The houses, the headrests, the amulets, the ostraca, the painted walls, the worn bones, the love poems, the excuse notes. The names are composite. The life is real. Somewhere in Deir el-Medina, on a particular hot night around 1300 years before the birth of Christ, a real family really did wash their feet in natron water, really did oil their children's skin, really did set a best-carved headrest beneath a real neck, and really did murmur the old protective words against the real scorpions in the real dark. We are not imagining them. We are remembering them as best the evidence allows. The lamp gutters. The family breathes slow. We have washed with them, oiled with them, learned why they sleep as they do, followed the blue lotus into its uncertain chemistry, and checked our gentle story against the hard ground of a real village. What remains is the deepest part of the night itself, the hours of actual sleep, and the strange, rich Egyptian beliefs about what happens to a person while they lie there in the dark, traveling, as they understood it, through a landscape far stranger than any dream. Because for the Egyptians, to fall asleep was not simply to rest. It was to set out on a journey. And that journey is where we are going, into the last and quietest stretch of our evening, as the household crosses fully over into the dark. Chapter 10. Sleep as a Journey. Dreams in the Egyptian Night. The lamp is out now. The room has gone fully dark, save for the thin wash of starlight through the high window, and the household has crossed over into sleep. For us, that would be the end of the story lights out, the day done. Nothing more to tell until morning. But for the Egyptians, this is where one of the most fascinating parts of their inner world began, because they did not believe that a sleeping person simply lay there, inert, waiting for dawn. They believed the sleeper went somewhere. Sleep was a passage, a nightly crossing into a realm that touched the world of the dead, the world of the gods, and the world of things to come. To understand what the Egyptians thought was happening as they slept, you have to understand the great story they told about the sun, because their idea of sleep was modeled on it. Each evening, they believed, the sun god Ra did not simply vanish below the horizon. He entered the Duat, the underworld, and traveled through it all night long in his sacred bark, passing through 12 regions, one for each hour of the night. It was a perilous journey. He faced the great serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos, who tried each night to swallow the sun and end the world. And each morning, having defeated the darkness, Ra emerged from the eastern horizon reborn, and the world began again. This was not a quaint myth to them. It was the most important thing that happened every single night, and it was never guaranteed. Now lay that story over the sleeping family, and the headrest makes its final, deepest sense. When Kay lays his head in the curved wood, shaped like the horizon, he is doing in miniature what the sun does in the cosmos. He is entering the dark. He is making the night crossing. He trusts as one must trust to sleep, at all that he will pass through the perilous hours, and rise again with the light, just as Ra does, just as the blue Lotus does, just as the whole world does each morning. The protective amulets, the bess at the headrest's base, the murmured spells, these are the family's small, human version of the weapons that protect Ra on his bark against the serpent. The Egyptian going to sleep was, in his own understanding, a tiny sun setting out on a tiny but genuinely dangerous voyage through the dark. And then there were the dreams. The Egyptians took dreams enormously seriously, because if sleep was a crossing into a realm that touched the divine and the dead, then a dream was a message from that realm. A glimpse, a warning, a visitation. The dead might come to the living in dreams. The gods might send guidance or demand something. The future might show its hand. This was not idle belief. It was systematic. We have surviving dream books, papyri that list dreams and their meanings, working almost like a reference manual. If a man sees himself doing such and such in a dream, it means this. If he sees that, it means the other. Some omens were good, some bad, and the books carefully sorted which was which. There's something wonderfully human in these dream books, the same impulse that fills our own bookstores with guides to interpreting dreams and decoding the unconscious. The specific meanings the Egyptians assigned often surprise us. The logic ran by association and wordplay and reversal, so that a dream of something pleasant might foretell trouble, and a frightening dream might predict good fortune. But underneath the specifics is a deeply familiar question. What does it mean? This strange theater that plays behind our closed eyes. Why do the dead visit us there? Why does the mind, set loose from the day, wander into such vivid and unsettling country? We have not answered these questions any better than the Egyptians did. We have only changed the vocabulary. They said a message from the gods. We say the processing of memory and emotion. Both are confessions that we do not fully understand the country we travel to each night. A bad dream in this world was not merely unpleasant. It could be dangerous, a sign of attack by a hostile spirit or the angry dead. And so the Egyptians had remedies for it, naturally. There were spells to be recited upon waking from a nightmare, to strip the bad dream of its power before it could take hold. There were protective measures taken before sleep, precisely to keep the bad dreams away, which brings us right back to the amulets and the headrest, and the murmured words we watched the family arrange around themselves earlier. The whole apparatus of protection we walked through was aimed, in large part, at exactly this, ensuring that the night crossing was safe, that the dreams that came were good ones, or at least harmless ones, and that the sleeper returned whole in the morning. If one of the children whimpers, in the night caught in a bad dream, or simply frightened of the dark, as children have always been, a mother's hand finds them, and perhaps a few of the old words are murmured again. The same words, worn smooth, that have settled children for longer than anyone can remember. There is no record of this particular moment, in this particular house, on this particular night, but there is a great deal of record of Egyptian mothers, Egyptian children, Egyptian nightmare spells, and the universal, undocumented, utterly certain fact that a frightened child in the dark has always reached for a parent, and a parent has always reached back. Some things did not need writing down. They were simply done, every night, in every house, in every age, and they are being done somewhere right now as you listen. Chapter 11. The deepest hours, stars, silence, and the sleeping village. Out beyond the walls, the village has gone entirely quiet. This is the deepest part of the night, the hours, when even the restless have finally surrendered, and the silence over Deir el-Medina and 1,000 villages like it is a kind of silence we have almost entirely lost. No hum of refrigerators, no distant traffic, no electric whine of anything. Just the settling tick of mud brick, giving up the day's heat, the occasional bark of a dog, the wind off the desert, and above it all, the staggering weight of the stars. The Egyptians knew that sky intimately. They were careful watchers of the heavens, and the rising of certain stars governed their calendar and their lives. The star we call Sirius, rising at dawn after its long absence, announced the coming of the flood that was the whole basis of their survival. The Egyptians even had a way of understanding that great dark sky that wrapped itself around the deeper meaning of the night. They told of Nut, the goddess of the sky, whose star-spangled body arched over the whole earth, her fingers touching one horizon and her toes the other. Each evening, in one version of the story, Nut swallowed the sun, which traveled through her body during the night and was born again from her at dawn. The whole sky, then, was a goddess in the act of protecting and rebirthing the light. A vast maternal ark thrown over the sleeping world. Imagine lying on your rooftop on a hot night, looking up at that immensity of stars, and seeing not empty space but the body of a goddess holding the darkness for you until morning. It is, whatever else you make of it, a more comforting sky than the cold, indifferent void our own age tends to see up there. It is worth dwelling, just for a while, on that lost silence and that lost darkness, because they shaped the Egyptian night in ways we can barely feel anymore. We have, in the space of a single century, almost entirely abolished true darkness and true quiet from human life. Most people listening tonight have perhaps never experienced a genuinely dark night sky or a genuinely silent night. The Egyptians lived inside both, every night of their lives. The dark was darker, the stars were brighter, the quiet was deeper, and the night was in consequence both more frightening and more profound than the soft, glowing, humming nights we now sleep through. Their elaborate protections against the dark make a great deal more sense once you remember just how dark the dark really was. And so, the family sleeps on through the deepest hours, each of them on their small night journey, heads cradled in the curved wood, guarded by Bess, and by the old words, and by the great arched goddess of the sky. The flood will come or not come. The work will resume at dawn. Kay will go back to his tomb wall and his aching neck. Merit will return to her grinding stone and her bread. The children will wake and squabble and be loved. Old Tai will rise slowly and begin her unhurried rituals once more. But all of that belongs to the morning. For now, in the cool dark before the light, there's only the breathing of the sleeping house and the slow wheel of the stars, and the long patient wait for Ra to win his nightly battle and lift the sun once more over the eastern hills. The sky is just beginning to thin in the east now, the first gray loosening of the dark, the hour the Egyptians waited for, with a faith we can scarcely imagine, the proof, delivered fresh each morning, that the world had survived another night, that Ra had beaten back the serpent once again, that the dead and the living and the sleeping had all been carried safely through. We have followed this family from the amber light of sunset all the way down into the deepest dark, and now, almost, back toward the light. There is just a little of the journey left, the waking, the meaning of it all, and a few last thoughts on what this ancient evening might have to say to our own. But before we rise with them into the morning, let us stay one more moment in the quiet and consider what it truly meant to these people, and perhaps to us, to lay down the day and trust the dark. Chapter 12. The Waking World, Dawn over the Nile. The light comes, as it always does, as the Egyptians staked their entire understanding of the cosmos on it doing. It comes in low and gray at first, then warming, sliding through the high window and creeping down the plastered wall, and the household begins, slowly, to stir. There is no alarm, no bell. Only the oldest clock there is the lightening of the sky and the temperature of the air and the body's own knowledge that the night journey is complete. Kay wakes first, as working men tend to, lifts his head from the curved wood and feels the particular stiffness and the particular relief of a man who has slept and must now rise. The sun has won again. He has come through. The whole village is waking in the same slow way, 100 households crossing back from the dark in near unison, the way they crossed into it the evening before. Doors open. The first smoke of the morning fires begins to rise. Somewhere a child is crying, and somewhere a woman is already at the grinding stone, because the bread does not make itself, and the day does not wait. The rhythms that governed Merit's evening, the heat, the light, the work, the river govern her morning just as completely, and will govern every morning of her life, as they governed her mother's and will govern her daughter's. There is a deep steadiness in this, a sense of life moving in a vast slow circle, sunset to sunrise to sunset, flood to harvest to flood, generation handing the same gestures to generation, without a break for 3,000 years. The headrest is set aside now, back on its shelf, waiting for the evening that will surely come, because the evening always comes. And I want to pause one last time on that humble object, because it has been our companion all night, and it deserves a proper farewell. When archaeologists lift a headrest from the floor of a house or the side of a coffin, they are holding the single most intimate object, an Egyptian-owned, the thing that touched them every night of their life, that cradled their sleeping head through every dream and every fear, that they trusted enough to place beneath their skull in the most defenseless hours, and that they wanted with them, even in the tomb, for the longest sleep of all. We began the evening puzzled by it. We end, I hope, a little in love with it. It is comfort and protection and faith and the shape of the dawn, all carved into a piece of wood by people who understood, far better than we sometimes do, that the way you end your day is the way you prepare to meet the next one. That the Egyptians placed headrests in their tombs tells you everything about how they understood sleep and death as two versions of the same crossing, one nightly and survivable, one final and, they fervently hoped, also survivable. The dead would need a headrest because the dead, too, would sleep and wake. Death was the longest night, and they meant to come through it as surely as Ra came through every darkness, as surely as the blue lotus rose each morning from the water. There is a particular kind of courage in that belief, and a particular kind of tenderness in the act of placing a familiar, well-used headrest beside a body you loved, so that they would have something soft of the old life, or rather, something hard and familiar of the old life to rest their head on the far shore. They were not being morbid. They were tucking someone in. Chapter 13. What the Whispering Walls Still Say to Us. So what do we make of all this, 3,000 years on, lying in our own beds in a world the Egyptians could not have imagined? The easy thing would be to marvel at the distance between us, the headrests and the memory foam pillows, the murmured spells and the sleep-tracking apps, the protective amulets and the locked doors. And the distance is real. But I think the more honest and more interesting thing, the thing this long quiet evening has been circling toward all along, is how little the essential human task has changed. They came home tired. They washed off the day. They tended their small lights. They cared for their skin and their children. They built a wall of ritual and meaning against the fear of the dark. And then they lay down and trusted the night to give them back to the morning. We are, it turns out, still doing every single one of those things. We have only swapped the tools and forgotten that the task is ancient. When you light a scented candle, you are reaching for what the lily oil reached for. When you take a warm shower before bed, you are doing what the natron wash did. When you check, one more time, that the doors are locked and the children are breathing, you are murmuring TA's protective words in a different tongue. When you reach for a cup of chamomile tea, you are an heir to the whole Egyptian pharmacy of the floodplain. And when you lay your head down on whatever you lay it on and let go of the day and trust that you will wake, you are doing exactly, precisely, identically what Kay did with his head in the curved wood, what every human being who has ever lived has done at the end of every day there has ever been. The whispering walls of those mud brick houses are still whispering, and what they are saying is, we were just like you. We were so much like you. There's a humility that comes from sitting with this for a couple of hours, and I hope you feel some of it as the evening closes. We tend to imagine ourselves as the sophisticated ones, the people who finally figured out how to live comfortably, and the ancients as our crude and struggling ancestors. But the Egyptians had worked out the management of heat, the care of the body, the value of ritual, the importance of scent and light and family and rest, with a refinement that our own frantic age is only now, expensively, rediscovering. They knew how to end a day. They knew that rest was sacred, that the body deserved tending, that the dark should be met with preparation rather than denial. We have brighter lights and softer beds and locked doors, and a great many of us, if we are honest, sleep far worse than Merit did, head on her curved wood, guarded by her god, scented with her lily oil, certain of her place in a circle of light and family and meaning. And the circle turns again. By the time you hear this, the family I built for you out of headrests in ostraca and worn bones has come and gone 100,000 times over every evening of every life in every mud brick house along that long green river. The same washing, the same oiling, the same lamps and words in curved wood, the same trust placed in the same dark, night after night after night, for longer than almost any other continuous human practice we know of. They are gone now, all of them, Merit and Kay and Tai and the real people of Deir el-Medina, whose excuse notes and love poems and grudges still lie in museum drawers. But they slept well, most of them, most nights. They knew how. And that knowledge, it turns out, was never lost, only mislaid and waiting, like a headrest on a shelf, for us to remember what it was for. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, in your own house, with your own small rituals already done or still undone, I hope you carry a little of this with you into the dark. You are not the first to lie down tired at the end of a long day, and you will not be the last. You are part of an unbroken line that runs back through every century to a woman lighting a lamp in a mud brick house across the river from Thebes 3,000 years ago, who wanted exactly what you want right now: to be clean, to be safe, to be at peace, and to wake again in the morning. Lay your head down, trust the dark. The sun has always come back. It will come back for you too. And in the quiet of history, their voices still echo, if we are willing to listen, soft as lily oil, patient as the curved wood, faithful as the lotus rising from the water at dawn. If tonight's journey stirred something in you, a memory of an old bedtime ritual passed down in your family, an evening remedy your mother or grandmother swore by, or simply a night spent sleeping under more stars than you could count, I would be honored if you shared it in the comments below. Your stories and your memories are their own kind of inheritance, and this audience holds more of them than any book. Now rest well. Dim your light, soften your breath, and let the night carry you gently as it carried them. I will see you in the next one.